Hello YouTube and welcome back. I am Benjamin Williams and today we're going to be doing another video in the home lab. Today's video is going to be focused on DHCP configuration. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be configuring DHCP on this ISR 4400 series router. And basically what that's going to do is that's going to give our switch right here an automatic IP address on this SVI VLAN 1 interface. And also, I'm going to plug in my Mac to this switch via an Ethernet connection. And my laptop is also going to be able to get its IP address from the DHCP pool that we configure on this Cisco ISR router. So that kind of gives us an idea of what DHCP does for us in a network perspective. Of course, DHCP gives us our IP address automatically. It gives us DNS information. It gives us our default gateway. And it also gives us the network that we will be communicating on. So as we know, DHCP uses UDP ports 67 and also 68. So it goes up to the DHCP server, which in this case will be this router. And it does, in your end device, does a discover message up to the DHCP server asking for an IP address from the pool. Now, many DHCP servers can be on the network. So then those DHCP servers respond with an offer message for our devices. After that, our devices send a request back to that server, with requesting that we get the IP address that they offered us. And then after the request is sent and the server receives that, then the server sends an acknowledgement down to our devices. And then after that, we're able to get our IP address information and browse the web and do whatever we want on the internet. So that is just a simple rundown of DHCP, what we use it for in the network, and how we as end users get IP address information on our devices. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at our lab topology. Very simple lab topology on today. As you guys can see, we have our router, which is over here. And we're going to configure a static IP address on our router, which will be 192.168.1.1. And then as you can see, our switch is going to get its IP address via DHCP. And our MacBook as well is going to get its IP address from DHCP. Okay? So I have a few commands that I am going to be referring back to in the lab as needed. In case I need to just glance over, see what the command is. I basically already did the lab before recording this video, but all good. That's enough of me rambling on. Let's get into this lab. All right, so our router has officially booted. It's asking for the initial configuration dialog. Of course, we do not want that. And yes, we want to terminate auto install. Now this usually takes a minute for that to register and for it to actually terminate auto install. So I always have to give this router a little bit of grace when it first starts up. As you guys can see, he's rolling out now. We should be able to take control of the device, and we can. All right, so now let's do an enable on this router. All right, and the first thing that we want to do is do a configure terminal. I want to do a configure terminal. I want to go into line to stop these messages from popping up and just taking over where I'm typing at. Let me just do this. Let me do a line console 0 to go into this console configuration, and I want to do a logging synchronous. It's logging synchronous. All right, there we go. All right, and then hit exit there, and that'll stop all of those pop-ups from messing up my typing as we do the video. Okay, now we want to do a do show IP interface brief to check out our IP address information. And as you can see on the gigabit 000 interface, or even all of the other gigabit connections, we do not have any IP address information. So we're going to do the connection to the switch from the gigabit Ethernet 000 on this router. We're going to connect this interface into the switch. So we need to configure the IP address on this interface. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Configure terminal. And then we want to do a we want to go into interface for gigabit Ethernet 000, and we want to do an IP address of 192.168.1.1. We want to do a 255.255.255.0 for a /24-bit subnet mask, and let's do a no shutdown to bring that up because we know router interfaces are disabled by default. Okay, so now we have that IP address configured on the router. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to start our DHCP process now. So let's do an IP DHCP, and there's a lot of options. If I hit context sensitive help, you can see there are a lot of options, and you can really get granular with what you want to configure within DHCP on this router. But I just want to configure a DHCP pool. Okay, so that gives us a pool of addresses that we can hand out within our network for the different devices that we'll be connecting. Okay, so we want to do an IP DHCP pool, and let's name this let's give it a name. Let's give it a name of gaming network. All right, so gaming network. All right, in our gaming network, we need to define the default router or the default gateway that each of our hosts is going to get when DHCP gives it its IP address information. So let's define the default gateway of 192.168.1.1. All right, hit enter there, and that is the router's IP address that we just configured. So basically what we just said is this router right here is your default gateway to any other host that joins this network. Okay, and then let's do a network. Let's define the network now of 192.168.1.0, and we can do a slash notation, but I always like to do the whole subnet mask, even though the slash is quicker. Let's do a 255.255.255.0. All right, and hit enter there. And now let's do a DNS server of 8.8.8.8. Hit enter there. All right, so those are the main 3 commands that you need to input on a router to get DHCP up and going. Okay, now there is an extra step that I personally like to take when I configure DHCP, and there are a lot more options that I like to get granular on as well when I do my actual configuration. But one that I want to point out is IP DHCP. And then if we do excluded addresses, I always like to at least exclude 10 addresses from the start of the address pool, just so I can have some static IP addresses to work with. I like to statically configure some of my devices within my network. But if you don't understand that, don't worry about it at all. But we can just do an exclude address of 192.168.1.10. I'm going to say 1.1. And we want to do 192.168.1.10 as our high IP address. And really you want to do this IP address too, because we configured this IP address as the default route. So we do not want any host to be able to get this IP address from the pool, even though we configured it already on the gigabit 000 interface on this router. Okay, so none of these addresses from 1 to 10 will be able to be given out to any of the hosts that join this network. Okay, so that is the last command on this router. Let's go ahead and plug into our switch and do the configuration on the switch. All right, so we should be plugged into the switch now. We are. It's asking for the initial configuration dialog, and no, we do not want to do that. And now we can configure this device. All right, let's do the same thing over here. Let's do an enable. Let's do a configure terminal. Let's go into line console 0, and let's do a logging synchronous, just in case any of those pop-ups come up with a interface change or whatever. It does not interrupt our typing. Okay, let's do an exit there. All right, now what I want to do is I want to go into the interface that we are going to be connecting from the router to the switch, and we're going to connect that to the fast Ethernet 201 on the switch, and I will actually show you guys the connection once we do it from the router to the switch. And then I'll also show you guys the connection from the switch to the actual Mac PC itself, okay? So first, I want to do an interface range, and I want to do the fast Ethernet 201, and I want to do a comma, and I want to do fast Ethernet 203, because those are the interfaces that are going to be going into the switch. And also the fast Ethernet 203 is the one that's going to be going into from the switch to the PC. And I want to do a spanning tree port fast. So those ports go straight into the forwarding state and do not have to transition through the various spanning tree states before they can communicate on the network. It just allows DHCP to run more smoother, and also for our end devices to be able to get on the network and get their IP address information sooner. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and plug from the router into the switch. So let me show you guys that. All right, so you guys can see my router right here. We can see that this is the gigabit 000. That is what we're plugged into on the router. And we configured the IP address, if you remember, on this exact port. So now let's take this other end and plug into the 201 that we just configured on the switch. And you can see this port came immediately up into the forwarding state, and that is because we configured port fast on this port. Okay, so now if I just expand the camera up just a little bit, I don't want to miss the DHCP configuration if it happens. So I want to go into interface for VLAN 1 now, and I want to do an IP address DHCP for this switch to get an IP address from the DHCP server or the router. All right, so IP address DHCP, that should request it, and let's do a no shut. All right, and give it a couple seconds. All right, so yep, it gave this VLAN 1 of this SVI. You can see it came into the upstate, and we should be getting our IP address information. Yep, we were able to get our IP address information. As you can see, it says DHCP 6 address assigned, and it gave us this switch an IP address on this SVI interface for the VLAN 1. It gave it an IP address of 192.168.1.11 and a /24-bit subnet mask. Okay, so now if I do a do show IP interface brief, we can see now this VLAN 1 interface has an IP address from the DHCP pool that we configured, and it's actually the first usable IP address, because if you remember, we excluded the .10 through .1. So the first IP address that was available was .11, and our switch received that IP address. We didn't have to go in and configure it manually. You can see the method right here is DHCP. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to plug in our laptop and then see if our laptop gets an IP address from the DHCP server. All right, so we have my MacBook up now, and as you guys can see, we are in the network section within the Mac, and we can see our IP address information. And this is just some remains from another configuration that I probably did on this device from before. But as you can see, if we didn't have protocols such as DHCP, we would have to go in here manually, and we still can, and configure our IP address, subnet mask, and our default gateway router for IPv4. And that was one of the things that I neglected to mention. You also get your subnet mask from DHCP. But I did say the network, so that's kind of is the subnet mask, but all good. So what we want to do is we want to change this from manual to DHCP. But before we do that, I want to show you guys, because these are hands-on videos I like to do. We're going to plug into the fast Ethernet 03 connection. That is the other one that we configured port fast on. And we're going to take our Ethernet cable that is plugged into our Mac, as you guys can see. That is it. And we're going to do this connection right here on camera. Everything's on camera, step by step. All right, you can see Oh, that's the fast Ethernet 05, and I can tell by the 5, and it's also going through the spanning tree state. Let me take that out and put it right next. And yes, that's 03. As you can see, it came straight up into the green state. So now, if I go back to my PC, the Mac, and I do, instead of manual, I want to get an address from DHCP. Let's see what address we get. I just realized that I moved the camera out of the way, but we can see our IP address information. We got an IP address of 192.168.1.12. So that is the next usable IP address that the router had. We got a /24-bit 7net mask. We have our default router, which is 192.168.1.1. We configured that on the router. And we also configured the DNS information of 8.8.8.8. So this computer now will be able to browse the internet and do what it needs to do. And it received all of its IP address information without any manual configuration at all. So that is my video on DHCP. I will be making some more in-depth videos on DHCP later on the channel. But I definitely appreciate you guys for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.